What is going on, everybody? Happy Friday, wherever you're watching it or whenever you're watching this. It's BobbyFi and James Mccool from Paydirt. We're going to be talking through how to use the Paydirt tools, and we're going to do a little preview for week 4 here. We've done these before. Some of it will be repetitive if you've watched the shows, but I really would encourage you guys to take a look, especially if you're a Paydirt member or a TrueDFS / Paydirt member. Either one, but either way, James, great to have you. How you doing, man? And what are you thinking about this week?
I'm doing okay. Week's better than last week. Hopefully I have a better run out in the DFS streets. I only played one lineup last week. I only played one in 555 because I just felt like last week I had a really good read on the slate. Like I didn't feel like I needed MME to like get exposure to X, Y, or Z or whatever. Like I just felt like last week was pretty straightforward. And I lost all my ass. So yeah, that's how it goes. But I'll get back into the Millie Maker this week and MME because I think this week's a little more wide open. But yeah, it's kind of shaping up to be a similar week to last week, maybe.
Yeah.
We just have the benefit of having like the stud QBs this week, whereas last week we only had a couple. So I'm looking forward to this week. How about you? What are you feeling?
Yeah, I've been struggling at a little start the season, which is not really rare for me. I usually weeks 4 and 5, I tend to get going a little bit. I base a lot more on sort of, I watch every single game, like basically, and I really try to put my own stamp on things. And it's always a little tough early in the year to get a total read on exactly what's happening. The thing that stood out to me for this week was that the afternoon games feel extremely appealing. Like all 4 of them, I feel like could be fantasy gold mines. And, I think that, we only have 7 games in the morning slate. It's a smaller slate than usual and a little less interested in the earlier games. Did want to remind everybody, if you are, playing a ton of entries, I think you want to make sure to late swap this week because it is going to be one of those weeks. And first of all, you should be doing it anyway, but this is definitely one of those weeks where I really don't think it's something you should be trying to avoid. So those were sort of my initial thoughts, just that the afternoon games were a little more appealing to me than the morning games for the first time in a while this week. So why don't we talk about whichever one you want to lead with? We know we have all the different tools that you guys got, but would love for you to share your screen and talk us through some of what's coming up for you guys.
For sure. So I will share my screen here. So we'll just go over the range of outcomes to start, just because that's kind of it's where I prefer to start things anyway. We'll talk about players that look good. We'll talk about ownership. We'll talk about some values that we're seeing. And then as we're running through, I'm actually running an update right now, and we'll be able to get into some of the optimals and take a look at what optimals look like overall. We can talk a little bit about stacks, talk about all that different kind of stuff. But I think for the most part, this week is going to be, again, let's find a cheap quarterback and let's just try to stack up studs. That's been kind of the story of the year so far. The backup quarterbacks are just too cheap. So because of that, which, by the way, I have said it here and there, but DraftKings really screwed the pooch on pricing this year.
Mm-hmm.
The pricing algorithm is just bad. Backup quarterbacks are way too cheap. Backup running backs are.
I would go even further and say that regular starting quarterbacks are too cheap. Like you got all the other quarterbacks are in the 5K range as well. So it's like it's a really, really strange situation. I don't remember it being this extreme in the past. Go ahead.
It's really, really light on QB pricing. Like Daniel Jones, 5,600, Caleb Williams, 5,800, Justin Herbert at 6,300. Like basically, if you're not a rushing QB, you're $6,500 or less. And
or you have Geno Smith at 54. Like it's just crazy.
Right, Geno Smith at 54. Somebody pointed out to me today in the Discord, Spencer Rattler at 4,700. I mean, that's like he averages like 15 fantasy points a game. Mm-hmm. Can you imagine if you were to get like Travis Kelce at 4,700? Like you'd be stoked. Not right. This year. Travis Kelce sucks this year. But like if you could get somebody who's averaging 15, 16, 17 fantasy points a game, and especially a quarterback for 4,700, it's just like I'm just gonna do that. I've been over the last couple of weeks, I've just been jamming in these 4K quarterbacks, Mac Jones, Carson Wentz, Marcus Mariota, these guys who are just way too cheap. Marcus Mariota went from being 4K last week to 5K this week. Like he should have been 5,500. And he's just not. So it's just, I think that they have really, really messed up the pricing algorithm so far. And it's not just quarterbacks either, right? Wide receivers are just too cheap. So you can just do whatever you want so far this year. And I personally hate that. I prefer tighter pricing. I prefer having to make trade-offs on things. And I have said for years that one of the reasons why I have an issue with NBA, one of the reasons why I hate playing NBA is because you kind of get into these positions where there's 30, 40 viable players every single slate. And when there's 30, 40 viable players, scores to win are going to be massive. And it ends up ramping up the variance. Sure, it feels good to build lineups that are stacked with studs. It feels good. That's why people like playing on FanDuel. Right. Because it feels good. But you got to understand that it doesn't make it so you're building better lineups. It just makes it so that everyone is building better lineups. And the pros can build way better lineups than you can, even with that lighter pricing. So I think they fucked up the pricing a bit. Anyway, I am sharing my screen on this, but I don't know how to live it.
Oh, here, let me do that. There you go.
Yeah, it's okay.
There we go.
So yeah, it seems like you agree with me on the pricing so far.
Yeah, totally agree about the pricing being soft. I also thought it was interesting because what people did last week, and I mentioned this on our Sunday show, and it was one of the things I really got right, was I basically, and I don't do this with defenses very often, but it was very strange to me because I actually thought what happened was you had all this extra money, so people were all spending up at defense last week. And I said, well, look, you have the Vikings, you have the Vikings, Bengals, and I can't remember and the Raiders. All in situations where one of those three teams, I think, will have an ultimate upside type of performance because you're playing against these backup quarterbacks, and no one wants to play any of those defenses. Obviously, the Vikings was an outlier, but they did put up 30 fantasy points, and you kind of needed them to win anything. But I thought that was kind of interesting that people were just using the extra money, like, oh, okay, I'll just pay up at defense. And that's not always necessarily the best way to go about things. In fact, paying up for defense is rarely something that I'm looking to do. So I just thought that was kind of interesting. And I also thought that it may, we talk about how these quarterbacks are too cheap, but at the same time, I think we're getting such low ownership on some of the higher end quarterbacks. We haven't really seen those monster quarterback games on the main slate so far this season. In fact, all of the NFL, the yardage, I believe, is the third lowest of all time. Going back to history, in the 60s and 70s, it wasn't, they were moving the ball more than they are this year. So it is a little bit weird, but I think we're going to start seeing some more of that, and maybe something we could take advantage of. I believe Jalen Hurts was on a bunch of winning lineups last week, but still not with a massive performance. But I think, paying up at quarterback is going to be a little bit more contrarian because you simply, quite frankly, don't need to. And you really only want to do that with guys like Allen, Hurts, and Lamar, because they have the monster rushing ceilings. But it's just an interesting thing that's sort of been playing around in my head. I don't know where I stand with it for this week quite yet, but that's something I've been thinking about.
Yeah. So let's take a look kind of at some of these projections. I'm going to go. So if you have used the projections, I'm over on Paydirt, but if you look on TrueDFS, this is the exact same setup. Yeah. So it'll start on simple view just because it's optimized for mobile, but if you go to advanced, you can see everything that we're seeing here. Looks like we're going to have some massive ownership on Christian McCaffrey and Puka Nacua, which makes sense, right? Like we just said, that pricing algorithm is so light this year that you're just going to get a lot of ownership on studs like those guys. But then you also have Josh Allen projected for 14% ownership, Lamar Jackson projected for 7%, and Jalen Hurts projected for 5%. And I think that those probably make sense. I would even say that Josh Allen probably comes in lower than that. I don't think people are going to want to play Josh Allen as a 90-point favorite against the Saints. People usually shy away from that. In every sport, they shy away from massive favorites. But the point of a massive favorite is that a team is expected to kick the shit out of another team. And when Buffalo scores, it's because of Josh Allen most of the time. And if not James Cook. Now, I haven't looked at running back ownership yet, but if Josh Allen is going to be 10%, then I would expect James Cook to be really, really high. So let's see where James Cook is looking.
Well, that's the thing I can't figure out is I actually think that it's not nearly high enough. Although the ownership has grown throughout the week. I talked about this earlier in an early look show with Sheets. I thought James Cook should pretty clearly be the number one running back this week, along maybe with McCaffrey, but I was surprised that it wasn't looking like that. Go ahead, James. Sorry.
Yeah, no, you're right. And I think he will be the highest owned running back. As we see it rising up, that's usually a sign that somebody is going to end up higher than what projection systems say that they're going to be. Something that I have done in the past is run kind of like a side-by-side comparison of each day so that we can see what players are expected to be higher or lower. I'm not doing it this year because I'm lazy. But I do think that James Cook is probably going to end up 35% owned. 7,100 is a fine price. He's had a great start to the year. As you can see here, I did add in the expected fantasy points as well for players. So Christian McCaffrey is just crazy. Expected fantasy points average so far in the year is 29, by far the highest of any player. But James Cook expected fantasy points is 20 per game. And that's really, really good. He's had a good start to the year so far. So I think that he is going to end up the highest owned running back on the slate and probably the highest owned player whatsoever on the slate. And that just tells me again that I think Josh Allen is probably going to come in a bit lower.
Yep.
And to your point, that's one of those spots you can take advantage of. Whereas everybody wants to pay up elsewhere, you can pay up for Josh Allen, fade James Cook, and get massive relative value on the field. That's one of my favorite things to do, is play a stack rather than the popular running back. What do you think about that this week?
That makes a lot of sense. I actually would go even a step further. You could stack, like literally, you could do an interesting stack, and you could play Josh Allen without any of his own receivers or anything, and then actually play. I mean, New Orleans plays really fast, so they get tons of plays off. Chris Olave leads the league in targets. You could play him with Olave and or Juwan Johnson from the other side. Now you'd say, okay, well, for those guys to get there, Spencer Rattler would have to get there. Maybe true, but Josh Allen, we could be, always at the upside of 2 or 3 rushing touchdowns, and his 35 points versus Spencer Rattler's 17.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And also the PPR side of the New Orleans thing. If you wanted to make a reverse stack and just have you're not really playing Josh Allen naked. You're playing him where they're throttling them on one side, and Josh Allen's sort of, the beneficiary. And then the guys on the other side are just the PPR monsters, Chris Olave and Juwan Johnson. So I think that's kind of an interesting way to go.
Yeah, I would also say this to that point. So when I look at a Josh Allen versus Spencer Rattler, I don't think that that's really the comparison that you're making, right? I think what you're really saying is Josh Allen plus a cheap player or Spencer Rattler plus an expensive player, right? So Spencer Rattler plus Jahmyr Gibbs. How often does that outscore Josh Allen plus $4,700 player that I can't think of off the top of my head, right?
Right.
And that's the kind of comparison that you make. And I think that you're right. When we look at Josh Allen has arguably the highest ceiling in the league. Maybe Lamar Jackson is a 1A, 1B with him, but Josh Allen, he has those 45, 50-point performances more than I think any other player. And so if you're comparing him against Jahmyr Gibbs or against a Puka Nacua or, Jonathan Taylor, like these guys who are in his price range, I know that people like to I think that it's kind of rewiring for people to think about quarterbacks in that way. But I think that's how you have to think about it this year, with the way the pricing is built and with the way the league is oriented and with the way that scoring is happening. So I really like that idea. Doing something like a naked Josh Allen with a Saints stack, or even on that same point, doing like a naked Spencer Rattler with, expensive players from Detroit or from the Rams. That was something I did last week. Last week I did a cheap quarterback, and then I had both Devontae Adams and Puka Nacua in my lineup, but not Matthew Stafford, because I thought that the deviation between Stafford and Carson Wentz is who I used was not as large as, getting those guys in my lineup. So I think that's the right way to think about quarterbacks this year is doing that comparison against flex players instead of quarterbacks themselves. I
like that quite a bit, actually. I think that's interesting. And the thing that, I always talk about this with sheets in certain, in every sport, it's kind of different. You can sort of just like, also, you could play Josh Allen, like just thinking about it a little differently, that you're just trying to win the position. If I get the most points at this position, I can I can get there with the rest of my guys. I think that's another way that I always try to think of it as well. Like I can get 10 more points out of my quarterback potentially if things go my way. If I play, again, these guys are too cheap, but I'm just sort of taking the devil's advocate point of view and saying, well, what if I was playing, half of my quarterbacks were just going to be Jalen Hurts or Josh Allen. I'm trying to think of who else would be another example this week, because nobody else is that expensive. It's really just those two. With
Lamar Jackson.
I can't say Jaden Daniels anymore because he's not in there. Well, I'm getting mixed things on this. Now I see Jaden. Are we sure that he's out?
Yeah, he was confirmed out.
Okay, because I've got I saw that he was confirmed out, and then I keep getting projections for him. I think it's just because they're rerunning the systems right now. But all right. But anyway, yeah. So I guess it's really just, it's really. Oh, I guess Lamar I forgot about. Yeah, Lamar, Josh, and Jalen. Anyway, sorry, keep going. I just wanted to throw in my
I think that's the right way to look at it. So we have these guys with really high medians, right? Christian McCaffrey, Puka Nacua, both these guys have really high ownership. But let's go ahead and just sort this really quick. I want to remove quarterbacks from this overall look and defense and kickers, even though those aren't actually existing. I'm bad at code. And I just want to sort this by expected fantasy points. We can see if there's some guys that maybe are being a little bit undervalued. So Bijan Robinson projects for 9% ownership, has one of the highest expected fantasy point averages. He's right there. I mean, he's 8,200. That's the hard part, right? Is if you're playing Christian McCaffrey or Bijan Robinson, not only is the expected fantasy points difference 8 points, but the median is 6 points too, right? So I get it. But at 9% ownership, you might want to take some shots there. James Cook, his expected fantasy points is fine at 7,100. But at the same time, and Jonathan Taylor at 7,500 projects for, I think that Jonathan Taylor will probably come in half the ownership of James Cook. And Jonathan Taylor has been the highest scoring running back, like 6 of the last regular slates. So that's something that I'd be interested in. Chuba Hubbard has a really nice expected fantasy points, and it's not like New England is good. He's only 6K, and an expected fantasy point 17 at 3% ownership. He could absolutely be somebody who I would want. Is there anybody who's kind of jumping off the page here for you?
Yeah, I'm still not sure. I'm still having a hard time. I actually think Dalvin Cook will go under owned this week. That's my take. I think when and again, there's partly when I see people clicking, but I'm looking at just different projections from different sites even. With Saquon and Jonathan Taylor in the same price range, I just think that people go to those names, and one, when hand building, and two, I think that the actual projections I'm surprised, but they actually have these guys ahead of Cook by quite a bit this week. So pretty much not across the board, but a lot of places. You got it a little different, but yeah. So I actually think that Cook is going to be a little bit underowned. And I think that Bijan, for wherever you're looking at, I think the projection of his ownership is too high. Most places, like SaberSim's got it too high, I think, right now. I do think people will pick McCaffrey and fade that. I also don't have any interest in playing a guy like Saquon against the Bucks. I say it every year, every week. You just don't win tournaments with running backs against the Bucks. Now, ones with pass catching upside, you can occasionally get there, but in general, you're not going to just torch the Bucks on the ground. That just doesn't happen ever. By the way, like it's been like 4 years since that happened. So anyway, yeah. So looking at the way things are breaking down from what I thought earlier, I thought that Bijan was an interesting pivot off of McCaffrey. I thought that Taylor and Cook are my extremely logical pairing. Those are probably my 2 favorites. And then I think that a very low owned Alvin Kamara, again, just because he may have like 10 receptions in a Bills game where they could be trailing, is the other one that sort of stuck out to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one point that I wanted to make when we were talking about the Josh Allen and Saints situation, a really interesting build path would actually be Alvin Kamara with Josh Allen on the other side. And that kind of gives you 2 different paths towards that working, right? It gives you the path of the Saints having a lead and Buffalo playing from behind, which, I mean, it's not the most insane thing in the world. Buffalo can lay down sometimes.
Anything could happen. Somebody could drop a kickoff, and you know what I mean? Especially with that weird kickoff these days, like you might end up with just a weird play that ends up getting you like a first and goal from the 3, and immediately you're up 7-0, and all of a sudden this Buffalo 15.5-point favorites don't look so great. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah. And like you have that kickoff return, and then all of a sudden Josh Allen throws an interception. Now it's 14-0. And like that could absolutely happen. So I do really like the idea of playing an Alvin Kamara. As I am looking at this, one of the other points that I think is different from last week. Last week we had Jordan Mason as like that cheap running back that we could just kind of plug in. And then we also ended up having cheap wide receivers. We had Ricky Pearsall and we had I don't remember
the 50-something hundreds, the Odunze.
Yeah. We had Odunze. That's right. Yeah, it was Odunze. We don't have like the straightforward values this week. So when I sort this by 3x, and again, this is just looking at flex players, Juwan Johnson looks good. Chris Olave, I think, is going to get steamed up quite a bit, 5,100. I think that he could end up being somewhere in the 10% range. Debo Samuel at 6K, people might play him, might not. It depends on if they pair him with Mariota. But like you can see, we don't really have like, de facto plug-in values this week like we did last week with Jordan Mason and Rome Odunze. So I think it'll be interesting to see how people go about it. I can see Cam Skatebo, however the fuck you pronounce his name, 5,500 getting up there because there is no more Tyrone Tracy. So I think people might plug him in, but the Chargers are like the best defense.
They're like the best defense. They might be the best defense of football.
Yeah, they might be the best defense. Yeah, they might be the best defense just overall. So are you seeing any values that you're really into this week?
So I'll point out the same one I said last week and shoot me in the face for once Jawan Jennings was announced out. I went to why can't I think of his name off the top? Kendrick Bourne, and I switched off of Trey Tucker. And Trey Tucker, of course, just went absolutely berserk, but I talked about it on our thing. He was my favorite value play. I thought he was being completely overlooked in a game that I thought was going to be a little wild, which it certainly was. Well, now we have the Bears and Trey Tucker is now 4,200. He's had 17 targets over his last 2 games. He had 8 targets the week before, by the way. He just didn't happen to complete any of them against the Bears defense. People are going to, if you think it's chasey, all I will say to you is there are no other value receivers, and 8 and then 9 targets over a 2-game period where you're going against one of the worst defenses in football and you're at home. I don't know why we wouldn't go back there. Forget projections be damned. He's the one play that I have as like a really, really cheap receiver. Cause like you said, these value plays are like, and again, they're mid to high 5K plays. They're these, and then you've got Olave at 5,100, but they're not like, we don't have the 3 and 4K guys, at least from a projection standpoint. I like the idea of going a little bit over on the Trey Tucker ownership, and I like the idea if you're getting a little frisky. The other one who I thought of as a sort of a sneaky play was Hunter Renfrow, but certainly from a projection standpoint, you don't want to be looking. You're not going to be looking at those guys. Those are just 2 that I'm going to go overweight on no matter what.
Well, I mean, if you're using Paydirt projections, you'll get to Trey Tucker, right? I mean, I have this sorted by 3X, and he is right there in terms of like some of the best 3X plays on the slate. And I think at 4,200, like that gives you the ammo that you need to be able to afford double expensive running backs. If you don't want to go with a Cam Skatebo, who I think is going to be the one that gets kind of like, steamed up a bit. So I like the Trey Tucker play a lot. I like the idea of both New Orleans and Las Vegas cheap guys. And overall, Las Vegas stacks just look really good. Yeah, I'm sure that people are going to mention it because, like you said, Chicago Bears defense sucks. Right. But you can build. If I go over to the stacks range of outcome, and I sort this by 3X, like Washington stacks, obviously, but then we have this Las Vegas stack, Trey Tucker and Brock Bowers. You get 15.4K for this stack. Their team total is 23.75. That's respectable. The ownership is relatively low at 22.65. I do think that comes up a little bit. I think it's gonna get a little bit more popular, but yeah, I mean, look right here, we have the Washington stack, which makes sense. This one's going to come up in ownership though, because Marcus Mariota is going to get steamed up a bit. Las Vegas, New Orleans, like these are all stacks that you and I have kind of like touched on as we've been going over things. And then the other one is Indianapolis. Daniel Jones, who has been just fire. And he has like that their wide receiving core is decent to good. Tyler Warren's a beast. They are another team that has a really decent team total, 23.23. And to stack Daniel Jones, Michael Pittman, and Tyler Warren is the same as Geno Smith, Trey Tucker, and Brock Bowers. And I look at that, like those 2 stacks are basically the same thing to me. And I would guess that Indianapolis comes in at single digits owned for all of them. How do you feel about Indianapolis here?
Yeah, I actually, against my Rams, I think this might be look, I was big on Indy before the year. I picked to make the playoffs. I think this could be a bad situation for them, worse than people think. I mean, first of all, they've been incredible. They punted 1 time. The next fewest, I believe, is 8 through 3 games, and most teams are in that 12 to 13 range. I think this Rams defense is really good. The Rams literally they won the game last week. They just forgot to win it against the Eagles in Philly. It was just they completely blew it. And I think you might see a little bit of an FU performance from them. So it worries me a tiny bit. However, that Indy, not only is Indy have they been good, they play in these games that sort of get a little bit, you want this sort of little bit wonky game. The Raiders
Yeah.
play in games like that in general. Washington played in a bunch of games like that last year, and so far this year against the Raiders, they had one of the other three so far. So I'm interested in that game a little bit. I don't know. I like Taylor, but I'm a little concerned that this Rams defense I think is really, really good and might give Daniel Jones a bit of a hard time. But I mean, I look at the names individually. I still love Tyler Warren. I like Jonathan Taylor. So maybe I don't believe it quite as much with my actual play as I do in my head that the Rams are going to control this game. And then even Pittman as a receiver or potentially Downs. Yeah, you've got a lot of options, and then you've got plenty of guys you can run back on the other side with the Rams.
Yeah, so let's just kind of play around with the hand build here, just to kind of get an idea of what that looks like, right? I think that it's probably fine. Oops, let me get rid of both of them. Just Josh Jones. I think that it would probably be fine to say, like, I really like as an overstack here, and I'm not as focused on overstacks this year as I have been in years past, but I really think that the Rams, with how tight that distribution is between Devontae Adams and Puka Nacua, I think that you can play them together like every week. And then if you put this together, right, and here's a nice little stack. This costs you $29.4 on DraftKings. You got $5,100 per player remaining, and you've locked in Daniel Jones, Michael Pittman, Devontae Adams, Puka Nacua, and Tyler Warren. That is a really nice base. You get the rushing upside from Daniel Jones as well. You get really low ownership on Michael Pittman, Tyler Warren, Daniel Jones, and then you get to lower your variance by eating ownership with Puka Nacua and Devontae Adams. So I think this is a pretty sick little base to build off of. Mm-hmm. I could absolutely see this being something that could win some GPPs. Thank you, baby. This is my wife, Margaret. She's terrific.
Hey.
Yeah, this is a nice little base. You could also, as we've been talking about it, like go with the other side and go with Matthew Stafford if you think they're going to put up one of those big performances and you prefer him over Daniel Jones. It's not like Matthew Stafford is that much more expensive. He's only $5,900. Mm-hmm. So I think I like this game. I think that this is going to be a week where, utilizing 2, maybe 3 players from any individual team. And if you wanted to just say, like, I don't think that Daniel Jones is going to be the winner here, but you still really like this game environment.
Yeah.
Like, we could go with Jonathan Taylor too.
Yep, absolutely.
And get a whole bunch of upside from this game. Absolutely.
Yeah. And like I said, my only logical concern after watching this Rams defense play is just they are tough. And look, they got the ball thrown on them a little bit last week towards the end. I think that's still probably the best way to attack them. But it's tough to do. I mean, that was a weird game against Philly. Like, I think the Rams sort of like thought the game was over, and then we have to play the fourth quarter. We don't get to just walk away with 26-7 winners or whatever it was.
Yeah.
I do have another take. I just wanted to throw out there and see what you. I think that there's a little. I don't think this Jackson Dart has any tournament winning upside based on old school thinking, like meaning that you actually have to score 20 plus points as a quarterback. You're playing against the worst, again, he's not enough cheaper than these other quarterbacks for me to go there. If he was 4K flat, I guess maybe it'd be a little bit more of, and I guess he's 45, right? Yeah. I don't know. I just feel like playing against this Charger defense in your first start feels like a non-tournament winning upside. I actually considered crossing him off because he keeps showing up for me in all these projections. And I just would rather play Mac Jones for 600 more. I'd rather play Geno Smith for 900 more. I'd rather play 1,100 more for Daniel Jones and go for the upside. I'd rather pay 700 more for Trevor Lawrence at 5,200. I'd rather play Spencer Rattler at 200 more. I just can't feel like anybody, and Jackson Dart keeps popping up, but I feel like all these other quarterbacks who are in a similar, especially Rattler, in a similar price tier and lower ownership, I think I'd kind of just rather do that. Any thoughts on that?
He fits the mold of what I would like to play this week, but to your point, I'd probably rather play Spencer Rattler.
Okay.
But there is, there is reason to consider Jackson Dart if Cam Scatterbo gets steamed up a bunch.
How about Mariota versus his former team in a dome at 500 more?
Yeah, I prefer that too. Absolutely. Yeah. I can see it from a leverage standpoint on Jackson Dart, but for the most part, I probably would not be super intrigued. If I'm going to play a quarterback that cheap, I'm going to play Spencer Rattler first off. And if I'm going to play cheap quarterbacks, I'm probably going to end up on Marcus Mariota, Caleb Williams, Geno Smith at 400. Like I don't think that 4,500 is unspeakably cheaper than a lot of other quarterbacks. Now, that being said, if I was in a position where the 4,500 versus, Jalen Hurts at 7,200, I think he is, I have been utilizing this year kind of like a 2v2 swap of going from an expensive quarterback to a cheap quarterback and an RB3 to an RB1 or something, or a wide receiver 2 to a wide receiver 1. And I do think that there's reason to do that if you are needing, if it only really works in a position if you were punting with a wide receiver 3 or a running back 2 or something just because you didn't have the money to make an expensive QB work. But I don't think we'll run into those problems this week. So yeah, Jackson Dart's going to be a harder keep for me. I'd probably just prefer to play Spencer Rattler, I think. I think I'm with you, but we'll see. We'll see how things go. But pairing him with Malik Neighbors makes a lot of sense because Neighbors is Neighbors. But
you do have a natural pairing, and that part I totally get. I just am having trouble seeing how they score 20 points against the Chargers. I have a lot of respect for the Chargers defense, so maybe I'm a little bit biased. I think they're really good. They also are the best red zone defense. Even going back to last year, they were the best red zone defense, and they're only better this year. So that's also, when it's hard to score touchdowns, it's going to be hard to win GPPs.
I think the Giants' play calling also sucks. Yeah, I just don't think the Daboll is good.
Yeah, fair enough. And by the way, I mean, look at this trend we're on with these New York quarterbacks finding homes elsewhere. I mean, it's pretty crazy with Geno Smith, Sam Darnold. You've got obviously Daniel Jones. Like it's pretty wild just in general. Both sides of New York, just how bad we thought these guys were and how they might. So one of these days, Zach Wilson's going to show up and just like light the world on fire.
Well, you say one of these days. I think that happens this season.
Really? Okay. He definitely has the skill set.
Yeah. I mean, I thought that Zach Wilson, like he got memed on really, really hard, but I thought he was fine fundamentally. He couldn't work with anything in New York. So like, and going and being in Miami, and I don't think that it's insane to think that Tua gets benched.
I think this is interesting. I like where you're going with this. This is kind of a fun conversation.
If Tua gets benched, Zach Wilson could come out and really show out. I don't think I don't think all the pieces of that offense are as dead as people want it to be. I think that Tua is just a guy. He's fine. Look, he's fine, but he's just a guy.
Right.
And I think that he is not dynamic enough to make the Mike McDaniels offense work the way that it needs to work. I'm a Mike McDaniels believer. I think that he's going to be really, really good when he has a quarterback that is not figured out.
So I agree with you. And I actually I think even if he does get fired, I hope my team hires him as an OC. I hope my team hires him as a coach. If I need a coach, I don't want it as the Rams, but I agree. I don't think that he's bad either. And what the difference between, sorry, we're sort of on a tangent, but I think it's kind of interesting to talk about. Like, the thing that happened in Miami is like Tua, what made him appealing to the offense was immaculate, coming out of college. And then even that first year when they were really running things, was the timing, precision passing, all these things that he doesn't have anymore. And now he feels any sort of heat in the pocket and he just throws away. And his arm strength, he can't throw it far enough to keep up with Tyreek Hill. So like, and Tyreek Hill's still fast, by the way. So I agree. I like this idea. If Zach Wilson gets a start at some point, we're going to have to sell out on Zach Wilson. I think we'll take a shot. I'm sorry.
Yeah. What I can't imagine a better thing to put thousands of dollars on than Zach Wilson's first start with
in Miami. I mean, those are weapons. You could play him with A-Chain and Hill, and you still got Waddle there, who's like I don't know what I think of Waddle at this point, but still, I think that there's something there. I don't think it's totally out of the question. Anyway,
no, I agree with you. I totally agree with you. Okay, so we've hit on kind of values, we've hit on stacks, we've hit on some players that we're interested in. Is there anything else that you want to kind of like talk about for this?
No, I just sort of want people to keep, I want to try and do this once a week so we can get people familiarized with the tools. Obviously, at TrueDFS, we're partnered with SaberSim as well as you guys, and we want just people to get used to using the Paydirt tools and really utilizing them in the best way. If there's anything else you want to show before we get out of here, happy to do that. I have another call in about 10 minutes, but other than that, I think that, this is helpful. And I really would encourage people, like, again, use our trial. Check out this stuff. It's really, really cool. And we have a very unique offering. You could use the Paydirt tools. You could use our tools. Our projections with Sheets and Goldie. You could use Saber Sims, and you could use the Saber Sim Builder, or you could use Paydirts. We have all different kinds of options, and I just would encourage people to check out the packages. I did post the link to the membership page. What else would you like to show, James? Anything else you want to close on before we get out of here?
Yeah, I just overall, like, I think that this slate stacks up as being relatively similar to last week. Where we do have some cheap quarterbacks and we have a couple mid-range values, not as much as last week. We're still kind of waiting to see who the cheap value is that gets steamed way up, because we haven't seen that yet. So I'm interested to see that. The last thing that I do want to show is the optimals, because I do use the optimals to make some decisions when considering things like single entry and 3-max. So I'm not a big, like, just choose a lineup guy and play it. I prefer to hand build things. So when I do that, what I want to know is who are the players that I should be focusing on and building around. So when you hear people say, like, what's the core four or whatever the fuck joke they make, right? I like using the optimals to create things like that. So one of the things that I like to do is use the optimals and get an idea of how to build lineups. So this is going to show you, you can download a whole bunch of lineups from here if you want to. But what I specifically want to see is, like, all right, here's the top 150 lineups. Using at least 49K salary, and based on projection, and that's important because I'll talk about that here in a sec. But based on projection, when I come down here, what we can see is we can see the frequency of players in the top 150 optimals. And I think this is really good information for who you should be building around. So Christian McCaffrey shows up in 98% of the optimals in the top 150. Puka Nacua shows up in 98%. Juwan Johnson at 82. Wow. Deebo Samuel 82, right?
Those are high numbers.
Like, we should build around these four guys for the most part. But also, if we wanted to see, right now, this has 25,000 lineups loaded in. Let's see what players are used in the 25,000 that are currently sitting there. And it is, again, Christian McCaffrey, Puka Nacua. But now we also get Cam Scatterbo. And this is one of the reasons why I think that he's going to get steamed up. We also see Chris Olave, right? I think both of those guys end up getting steamed up quite a bit. Scatterbo is probably going to end up in the 20% range, I think.
Yeah, and Olave is going to be one of the most popular receivers for sure.
Yeah. So these five guys, you can see there's a clear break after Deebo. You drop down to 38% for Chris Olave, but everybody else here, I would probably, for single entry, be hard-pressed to build outside of these five guys and then make it work around them. Now, the other thing that I like to do is look at ownership optimals. If I build for cash games, for instance, I like to use ownership as the variable that I optimize on. So now, instead of optimizing or pulling in lineups that are optimized on projection, these are optimized on ownership. So you're going to see the lineups that have the highest ownership overall. So then we can come down here and we can see, again, who are the players that show up the most when optimizing on ownership. Christian McCaffrey, Jacoby Myers, Puka Nacua, James Cook, and then we get a drop, right? So now, if you were considering who you wanted to bring into your lineups to lower your variance, it would be Jacoby Myers and James Cook, right? Instead of having the other guys here who were based on projections. We can do the same thing with seed frame stuff. Puka Nacua, Christian McCaffrey, Jacoby Myers, James Cook, Josh Allen, 32%, Omari and Hampton, right? So we get Puka Nacua and Christian McCaffrey one way or another. Like, we just want to build around those guys. Those should be in your lineups if you're playing single entry.
Look at the Trey Tucker down there.
Yeah, and then you see Trey Tucker, right? So he's going to come up.
Yeah.
And that's because of the things like Geno Smith, I think. So this is a really interesting way, I think, to consider the way that you're building out your cores. You don't need some tout to tell you what your core can be. You can look at what the optimals are and what the best lineups produced are doing, and you can build around the players that show up the most in the best lineups. So that's kind of the last thing I wanted to show. I like using this stuff to build out my single entry stuff. If I'm building single entry for a large field, I prefer to do it off of projections. And for small field, I prefer to do it off of ownership, just because I don't need the same ceiling for small field that I do for large field. So I
was curious to ask you a question about this because I think this is awesome. For a main slate, this is incredible. I was going to ask you, as far as showdown and let's say it's the playoffs and you have a 2-game slate or the 4-game slate or just even the afternoon slate. Do you find that you would care less about who shows up in the optimal, just especially in showdown where, like, literally the range of outcome, like, I mean, Tylan Wallace had the highest score in one showdown last year. You know what I mean? Do you pay less attention to it, or do you still factor it in just the same? Do you think?
So for showdown and for small slate stuff, I like using the contest sims. And we can just go run I don't know if I can run a contest sim because I just fucked up some things. But actually, wait, no, maybe I can. Let's see. Let's go take a look. I know that you only have 5 minutes left. But
no worries, no worries.
So for showdown, and I do this, if you go over to my YouTube, you can actually see me go through this breakdown. Nope, I want my videos. So I just did this one right here, which is me breaking down the showdown yesterday for for the game. And I used the contest sims to go through this same kind of process. Let's see if I can run things. Yeah. So what I would do is I'll just run a contest sim, right? And this is New England versus Carolina. And then what I want to see is I want to see the exposures versus the projected ownership. And so I like to focus on things, and ownership is obviously fucked for these things right now, so don't pay attention to that. But what I will usually do is I'll take a look and I'll say, okay, this player is this much under-owned. They show up in 32% of winning lineups. They're only projected for 8% ownership at captain. So like I want to focus on Drake May captain. Then I go over to flex and I do the same thing. So in the flex, Drake May shows up 34% in the flex, and then his projected ownership is 35%, but he shows up when winning lineup 63% of the time. So that's where I prefer to look at like what the field is expecting versus what my models are showing actually works. And this is not as much focused on projection, to your point. It's more focused on like the ownership of a player and what we should expect, what their efficient ownership should be, based on simulating out the contest. So I like to focus on things more this way. And, a lot of the time I focus a lot more on ownership just overall. So when I'm doing things like this, and I want to say, look at showdown. I don't even know if these are going to be oriented correctly right now just because of the way that I did things. Yeah, they're still broken right now. But what I would do is I would then, again, do it off of ownership, just because I think that that's a better way of seeing like, okay, these are the players that are expected to be highly owned. But the difference in showdown is I would be like, all right, this player's projected to be 80% owned. Do I really want to play them? Because of the variance around showdown, rather than like plugging them in, make some decisions around how much variance I can get and how much relative value I can get by fading them. So that's a long-winded way of saying I prefer to look to other things other than projections for things like showdown and small field. I think it's much more game theory and leverage based.
Nice. I think it's really interesting. And James, as always, really appreciate having you on here. This is great, and we'll try and keep it going throughout the season. And guys, I want a reminder to check out the packages. And James, anything else before we get out of here? No,
I think it's going to be a really good slate. I'm hoping to win $1 million.
I hope you do, and if you don't, I hope I do, or vice versa, whatever. What somebody from our little core team of extended people or whatever.
Yeah.
All right, buddy. Good luck this weekend, and I hope you all have good luck as well. Any questions or anything, hit me up in Discord. And yeah.